All right, so first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take off this upper receiver so you can get started at the gearbox. There's gonna be 2 pins here, one front, one back. I usually like to take the back one out first and then go toward the front. Cool, so with that one out of the way, you can kind of pull the front up and it'll ratchet out. It takes a little bit of stress off the front pin. Cool, so once that is done, you can take this off and just set it aside because you won't need this part to install the jack. Now that we have just the lower receiver, we're actually gonna go ahead and I like to take gearboxes out, moving from back to front, especially when they have this half hop-up unit in the bottom. Kind of makes it hard to go from front to back. So you wanna go ahead and pull that down, take the crane stock off. Then you gotta remove these wires so you can get to the gearbox screw. Now sometimes this little nut right here can get caught depending on if it's thin like this one or thicker or not fully cut out. It can get stuck in there, so sometimes you got to wiggle the wires a little bit to get it out. And once you have that out, go ahead and remove the buffer tube. Set that aside for now as well. Then take this off. If you have a sling plate, it's going to look slightly different, but it's the same function. Just covers up that hole in the back of your lower receiver. All right, next thing you got to do is look right here and you'll see the 2 screws on either side that actually holds this bottom plate in, which is your motor height adjustment plate. So grab about a medium-sized screwdriver. Go ahead and take that one out. And take out this front one. Careful, because sometimes it can spring up and you don't want to lose those screws. Alright, so you can set that aside as well. And then you're just going to have to disconnect these 2 wires which lead to the motor. Red one first. Then go ahead and take off the black one. And that's when you can actually pull out the whole motor. Make sure you don't lose that spring down in there too, because that does fall off sometimes. Now deep inside here, there's going to be a screw at the back right and the front left. So you kind of got to position it so you can see it in the light. Then just with the same screwdriver, reach down in there, start twisting those off. Now when I do this, I make sure that I don't take them all the way out of the grip, because it can be easier to reinstall your gearbox and like in this instance the jack and everything with the screws still down inside the grip. Cool. So there's the front one. So remember, like I said, just don't take them all the way out so it's easier to reinstall later. Cool. So now that you got this off, just go ahead and leave it right here. Again, make sure you don't tip it upside down or anything like that so those screws do stay in it. Now it's just one more thing left, and that's going to be the mag release because it does hold in the gearbox. So it's usually a screw. It could be a Phillips head or an Allen, something like that. Just go ahead and find a small enough screwdriver. Pop that guy off. Again, make sure you keep a thumb on that mag release button because it does have a spring behind it, so it can pop off and you can lose that. Alright, so now that that's out, if you have a 1-piece hop-up, you're basically done. You can go ahead and pull the gearbox right out. In this instance, we have the 2-piece hop-up, so we just got to take that front piece right here out of the guns. Again, 2 screws, 1 on either side. Go Go ahead and set those aside. Again, make sure you're kind of mapping stuff out and leaving it pretty much in the same way you would put it back into the gun. Just make sure you don't lose any screws, anything of importance like that. Cool, so now you have the lower receiver. Go ahead and throw that up top. We'll get to that later. Now we just have the gearbox shell. So on here, there's gonna be 1 screw in the back, 2 at the bottom, 1 in the middle, 1 toward the front, and then 4 along this top row. So just make sure you take it out from front to back this time, because the back will hold in all the spring tension. So as you take out the last screw, just keep your left hand on that, or your right hand if you're a lefty. All right, now that that one's out, switch hands. And I have a kind of a cut Allen I use. It's a T-handle, so I can get all 4 fingers underneath, push down on it just to hold that spring guide down. And then as you pop the gearbox up, keep a hand right here on your cylinder, because it can spring that part up as well. All right, what you heard right now is the piston just slamming forward. That's fine. Sometimes they get a little preset back, especially if you're short stroking your gun, things like that. So now as you take it out, put the meat of your hand right here on the cylinder, your finger over the spring guide, and then just kind of pull it up and pull that whole assembly away. So you have your spring guide and your spring. Go ahead and put these down. You won't need them for the install. And then as you're taking everything apart, I usually go from top to bottom inside a gearbox. So you take your little pick, just pull this spring right here off. It's what holds the cylinder assembly in, as well as the tappet plate, and keeps that nozzle springing forward. Just go ahead and hook that at the front, pull it off that front post, and then go ahead and grab the whole assembly with the piston and everything. Set that aside. Now you can go ahead and take your sector gear, set that off to the side, then your bevel gear, and your anti-reversal latch, and then your spur. Go ahead and set those aside, and then just make sure you're popping out all of these little bearings or bushings, whatever your gun has in it, because you don't really need them for the jack anyway, so you might as well take them out before they fall out later on. So now that we got that out, what you have to take out is your trigger. You just kind of pull it up and slowly let it rotate, because it does have this stiff spring right here. And if you just pull straight up, the spring could go flying and then you won't have a trigger spring anymore. So again, just be very careful and make sure you're keeping track of everything you're taking out. Next, we got to take out the wiring harness right here, and you'll see there's a spring right here on the top that keeps that shuttle and pushes it back. So you're pushing it forward when you shoot, and it's pulling it back every time. Just go ahead and lift that off of that post you see right there. All right, now that that's done, you can pull these wires out of the way, set them where the trigger used to be, and then down inside here, just under and to the left of the shuttle, there's a small screw which holds in the wire harness. So you can go ahead and unscrew that. I'd say it's slightly smaller than medium-sized Allen, or I'm sorry, Phillips head. Sometimes can be an Allen. So make sure you go ahead and grab that out of the way. Hold on to that, because you will need that for the jack trigger board. All right, so now that everything's out, make sure you grab that spring. Sometimes it falls off. Just set all of this aside, because you won't need that anymore. I would leave in the safety bar. You will need it for the jack. So this part right here, just go ahead and take that out. Again, it's a small Phillips screw right in the middle of it. All right, on this back side, there will be a spring connected to it. So you want to make sure you take that spring off. Again, do it slowly, because it likes to run away from you. Go ahead and set that down. You can actually take that piece completely off. All right, so now you're pretty much just left with the safety bar and the selector plate in the back. Once you get down to that, go ahead and clean it up. If it's a dirty gearbox, you know, old, got a lot of lubricant all over it, go ahead and clean that up because any of that isn't going to be good for the jack trigger board. Once you're done with that, you can go ahead and grab this trigger board right here for the jack. It's a standard version 2 trigger board. You'll see it has the same kind of hole that our other trigger board did. It's because it's a straight drop in. It can be kind of tricky to get in. You kind of have to move it down and out of the way and then set the back in. Cool. So once you have that in, go ahead and grab that original screw you had. Just make sure you lined it up through the hole correctly. Then go ahead and screw down that board. All right, now grab your wire harness that comes with the jack. And this part can be a little tricky to plug in. Kind of have to work it over the other sensor and plug it in to the front of the trigger board right there. So you have to kind of bend it a little bit over the sensor and then it'll fit right in. Next part you have to do is place the jack assembly itself. You'll notice it looks exactly like our cylinder set, and that's because it's just a straight drop in to the top front of the gearbox. Go ahead and set it in. All right, so now that that's set in, you're going to take this wire right here, it's your data wire, and it's going to get plugged in just underneath where the wire harness was. So you'll see it's marked by a little J2, and that's where you're going to want to plug it in. All right, and just make sure the wires stay out of the way. Throw the wire harness underneath the air hose. Make sure you get it down into these channels. It can be a little stiff, especially when it's brand new, so just make sure you work it in nice and easy. You don't want to tear the wires or tear the covering that comes with it. And then once that's down in there, just going to put the hose over. Make sure it goes through the bottom. Once you've got all that set, last piece you have to worry about is the trigger. So the way you have to get the trigger in is make sure you put the spring in first. And then just work the trigger down into its little spot. All right, again, just make sure all these are positioned correctly and are routing all the right way. Okay, once you've finished up with that, and you can throw the top of the gearbox shell back on. Again, just making sure everything's in its place. everything is routed correctly. You don't want to pinch anything, especially when you're putting it back together. So now that we've got everything back inside the gearbox, you can go ahead and start placing your screws back in. Alright, so now that you've got all your parts in, you've got your gearbox complete, you can go ahead and throw it back inside the lower receiver. Again, just making sure you're not pinching any wires as you put it through. Oftentimes when you drop a gearbox back into a gun, you got to make sure the selector switch is on safety. If it's still not going in, just kind of play with it. And then a last check you want to do is just look down inside here, and you can kind of see the selector switch moving back and forth, just so you can make sure that everything is in its place and moving correctly. Since this one does have the half pop-up in the front, once you've checked everything, you kind of have to put it in together. As you can see, the gearbox will hit it on the top and the nozzle will hit it on the top as well. So you just got to make sure that everything is seated correctly and seated at the same time. Once you do that, take your two screws, the one from the left and one from the right. Go ahead and drop those back in the hole. Again, careful not to drop anything or lose anything. And just screw them right back down. Cool. Once you've done that, go ahead and grab the mag release. Now that that's in, go ahead and do our pistol grip. For that, you're gonna have to actually remove this fitting. To do so, this black piece right here, you gotta pull down and tug off the line. If you just try and pull the connector from here, it won't do anything. It's actually designed to grab the more it pulls. So you just wanna make sure you're grabbing, again, from the top right here on both sides, and then pulling away from that hose. So thread this guy through the middle of the pistol grip where your motor gear actually came out of. Just put him through the middle. Set this grip back down. If for some reason your screws came off, easy trick is to actually rub your screwdriver against your motor, and it will actually magnetize it. That way, when you try to pick up a screw, the screw is going to get magnetized to the screwdriver, and it's a lot easier to put in. Alright, now that that's in, start moving further back. Again, take this piece or your sling plate, whichever one you have, throw that guy on there. Just make sure everything's bending correctly. Again, this is something you definitely do not want to pinch, otherwise certain parts of your jack or almost all of your jack will not work correctly. Just make sure everything sits in there just flush. Right? And then when you go to put your buffer tube spring or screw back in, make sure you pull that down out of the way. Position this cutout on the side that the wire harness is on. Once it's down in there, grab your long screwdriver. Make sure everything's snug. Okay. As we finish that, grab your upper receiver. Make sure you put that front on. Ratchet towards the back. You'll notice it'll want to pop off at first. Just make sure you're holding those two tabs down right there. lock it into place. Okay. Go ahead and flip the whole gun over. Make sure you grab the front pin, throw that down in the gun, and then the rear pin. Once those two are in, you would put your FCU and your battery down inside here. So just make sure you curl everything up nice and easy. Again, don't want to be too rough with that or pull any wires out of place. So once that's all down in there, put your stock back on. Again, if you have a crane stock or a standard LE style stock, you're just going to pull all the way down and it'll click right into place. And there's your finished product.
Before the jack install,